When life falls apart, where do you even begin to make sense of it? Looking back, maybe the cracks were always there, but I chose to ignore them. So, for this confession or whatever this is, I'll rewind to our 5th anniversary. 5 years with Lila, and I thought I was doing everything right. Sure, my job keeps me busy. I work in IT management, and it's not a 9 to 5 where I can just put my phone down and call it a day. Deadlines loom constantly, clients breathe down my neck, and my boss seems to think I'm some machine that doesn't need a break. So yeah, I was distracted when I planned our anniversary. But I tried, okay? I set up a nice dinner, lit some candles, even got her a piece of jewelry I thought she'd love. But the moment I handed her that gift, I could see it. That disappointed look that made me feel like I just insulted her. She barely unwrapped it before tossing it aside like it was trash. "You just don't get it, Scott," she snapped, her tone dripping with that condescension I'd grown far too used to. "It's not about the gifts. It's about you actually being here for once." And just like that, it blew up into another fight. I tried explaining, making her see that I was doing everything I could to make things work. But she didn't care. She just kept going on about how I was married to my job and how she felt like a roommate rather than a wife. I tried to keep my cool, but the frustration poured out. How she never seemed to appreciate anything I did. How she was constantly picking at every little thing. By the end, we were practically shouting. Our mutual friend Emma, who had invited us, probably regretted ever hosting us that night. It ended with Lila storming out, leaving me standing in a room full of people awkwardly trying not to look at the half-eaten cake on the table. Looking back, I didn't fully understand it then, but that was the first real crack in our marriage. A couple of weeks later, I got hit with one of those last-minute business trips I couldn't avoid. I had no choice but to pack up and leave. And Lila? She was likely back home complaining to her sister Brooke about what a jerk I was. Or maybe she found someone else to unload her misery on. My best friend, Marcus. Now, Marcus, where do I even start with him? We've been friends since college, and I never imagined he'd betray me like this. But while I was busting my ass to keep our life afloat, Lila was inviting him over for friendly visits. Wine, board games, just two pals hanging out while her husband was away. Except it was a lot more than just board games. Lila eventually told me enough for me to piece it together. She was lonely, and Marcus was there for her. It makes my blood boil just writing it. I can picture it. The two of them on our couch, her pretending to be the poor, neglected wife, and him, the smooth-talking jerk, holding her hand, feeding her the "you deserve better" lines. A couple of glasses of wine later, they were probably tearing each other's clothes off right there on the couch where we used to watch movies together. Meanwhile, there I was in some cheap hotel room, trying to salvage a sinking project, completely clueless about what was happening back home. The worst part? I was actually worried about Lila. I kept thinking, I hope she's okay. Hope she's not too lonely. Turns out, she was far from lonely. She had Marcus to keep her company. I found out later that it wasn't just a one-time thing. No, they kept it going, and I was too damn blind to see it. I came back from that trip, and Lila was all smiles, acting like she'd missed me. She even cooked dinner for me. I had no idea that, in reality, she was just relieved she'd gotten away with it. But then, I started noticing things. She'd leave late at night, claiming she was meeting up with her sister or going for a drive to clear her head. She'd come back with this odd look in her eyes, like she was hiding something. And Marcus? That guy still came around, laughing and having beers with me like everything was normal, all while sleeping with my wife behind my back. Around that time, things at work began to spiral, too. My project was delayed, my manager was all over me, and I could barely concentrate. I catch myself wondering what Lila was really up to, whether she was out with her sister or sneaking around with Marcus again. Something in my gut told me things were wrong, but every time I brought it up, Lila would explode. "You're just paranoid," she'd yell. "Maybe if you actually paid attention to me instead of your damn job, you wouldn't have these crazy ideas." And I bought it. I thought maybe she was right, that I was too absorbed in work and maybe pushing her away. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was happening right under my nose, and I was too blind to see it. That was just the start. Things were about to get a hell of a lot worse. They say that once you smell betrayal, it never leaves you. It clings, gnawing away, making you question everything. That's where I was after our blowout fight. I tried brushing it off, chalking it up to stress, but something kept nagging at me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. While I was scrambling to keep my project from collapsing, Lila was living her double life, meeting Marcus more often than I realized. And it wasn't just casual anymore. She'd gotten so bold in her sneaking around that she barely tried hiding it. She'd text late at night, slip out at weird hours, and whenever I asked where she was going, she'd shoot me that look. The "how dare you question me" glare. Whenever I asked about Marcus, she'd get defensive. "We're just friends," she'd scoff. "Stop being so paranoid, Scott." At the same time, work was a disaster. My project was tanking, and I was barely holding it together. That's when I met Taylor, a new colleague. Taylor was young, ambitious, and, I'll admit, attractive. She started giving me these looks, and while I noticed, I initially brushed it off. After all, I was married. But as things with Lila got worse, I found myself spending more time with Taylor. She was eager to help with the project, staying late, bringing me coffee, and actually listening. Something Lila hadn't done in months. That night, Taylor stayed late with me, helping me untangle the mess my project had turned into. It was just the two of us, in the dim light of the office, and there was something in the air that I hadn't felt in a long time. For a brief moment, I thought about leaning in, closing the distance between us. But I quickly snapped out of it. What the hell was I doing? Despite everything, I still loved Lila, no matter how infuriating she'd become. So I buried myself back in work, trying to smother the doubts I had about her and Marcus. But the doubts kept stacking up. Lila's behavior with her phone got shadier by the day. She'd turn the screen away from me every time it buzzed, trying to be sneaky. Once, I saw a message flash with just the initial B. She brushed it off as a work thing, but I wasn't born yesterday. I knew who B was, that so-called friend Marcus, who was pretending to have my back while getting way too close to my wife. One night, I came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Lila, maybe to reconnect. Instead, there she was in the kitchen, all dressed up with that forced guilty smile plastered across her face. "Where are you headed off to?" I asked, trying to sound casual but feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Just meeting Brooke for a few drinks," she replied, not even bothering to make eye contact. The Brooke excuse was her new go-to, always off to meet Brooke or catch up with a friend. I wanted to believe her, but I checked Instagram earlier that day. Brooke was off with her boyfriend for the weekend, far from our town. A few nights later, Lila stumbled back in around 2 a.m., smelling like booze and something else. That was the night I finally snapped. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded, blocking her path as she tried to slink past me to the bedroom. She groaned, rolling her eyes. "Not this again, Scott. I was with Brooke, okay?" Couldn't hold back. "I know you weren't with her. Who was it this time? Was it Marcus?" Her eyes widened for a moment, betraying that flicker of panic, but she recovered fast. "You're insane," she hissed. "You need to stop these paranoid fantasies before you ruin everything." But I saw through her. She was lying, and we both knew it. Meanwhile, at work, Taylor was becoming more than just a friendly colleague. She'd drop hints about her last relationship, how it had been with a married guy, and how she didn't mind a little complication. And yeah, there were moments I was tempted. She was right there, willing, and honestly, I was angry and exhausted. But each time, I'd think about my wedding day and the promises I'd made to Lila. As furious as I was, did I really want to drop down to her level? But Lila and Marcus weren't stopping. They weren't just hooking up anymore. They were talking, bonding over their shared dissatisfaction. I found out later he even cooked her a romantic dinner at his place. Can you believe that? That snake in his apartment, putting on his perfect gentleman act while stabbing me in the back. Lila would come home talking about how alive she felt, like she was discovering herself all over again. Meanwhile, with me, it was like I was a burden she had to put up with, the guy she put on autopilot for. She was slipping away, and any time I tried to get her to open up, she'd turn it back on me, saying I was too controlling or too absorbed in work. One night, after she left her phone unattended, a message popped up while she was in the shower. It was from Marcus, saying, "Last night was amazing." My hands were shaking as I read it. When she came out, towel wrapped around her, looking all innocent, I couldn't keep it in. "What the hell is this, Lila?" I yelled, tossing her phone onto the bed. She glanced at the screen, and for just a second, I saw all the color drain from her face. But then, like a switch, she turned it back on me. "You're insane, Scott," she screamed. "Why are you going through my phone? You're obsessed." "Damn right, I'm obsessed," I shot back. "You're screwing Marcus, aren't you? Just admit it." But she wouldn't give me the satisfaction. She dug her heels in, twisted the whole thing, gaslighting me until somehow I was the villain for spying on her. And the worst part? I almost believed her. I later found out that even Marcus was having second thoughts, thanks to his loudmouthed friend Dylan, who mentioned to me that Marcus was torn about the affair. Apparently, Dylan had even encouraged him to just go all in with Lila. Little did they know the fallout was coming, and I was done playing the nice guy. You know that moment when everything finally clicks, and you think, to hell with it? I'm done playing the good guy? That's where I landed after the last blowout with Lila. She had been lying to my face, sneaking around with Marcus, and making me feel like I was losing my mind. Well, if she was going to act like our marriage was over, then fine, I was going to make sure she felt the consequences. That's when Leah, my neighbor, came into the picture. I'd known her casually for a couple of years, but I hadn't really noticed her until recently. I'd been hitting the gym more to clear my head, and I kept running into her there. Leah was fit, confident, always smiling in this easy, comforting way that made me feel like maybe everything wasn't going to hell after all. One night, after yet another fight with Lila, I hit the gym late, hoping to blow off steam. I ran into Leah again, and we ended up talking. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone actually listened to me. She didn't judge, didn't try to tell me how to fix my life. She just listened. After that, we started grabbing coffee after workouts, talking about life. I could tell she was interested, and honestly, I was too. But I held back. I wasn't quite ready to go down that road. Still, it felt good to have someone who saw me as more than just a workaholic husband with a crumbling marriage. The real shift happened after another brutal fight with Lila. She was out, probably with Marcus, and I was stewing at home. That's when her younger sister Brooke called, just checking in to see how I was holding up. Brooke had always been the fun one, a bit more easygoing, unlike Lila and her constant moods. I don't know what possessed me that night. Maybe it was the whiskey, maybe it was the frustration, but I invited her over, telling myself it was just friendly company. But when she walked in, I saw that look in her eyes, the same look Lila used to give me back when things were good. We started talking, and one thing led to another. Before I knew it, we were on the couch, making out like teenagers. I didn't stop her, didn't even hesitate. The next thing I knew, we were in bed, clothes scattered everywhere. And I was with her, letting out every ounce of frustration and anger I'd been holding in. Brooke was nothing like Lila. She was wild, open, giving herself to me in a way Lila hadn't in ages. And yeah, there was a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing I was with Lila's own sister. That night, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, vindication. The next morning, Brooke slipped out with a quick kiss on my cheek, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And you know what? I didn't feel a shred of guilt. Instead, for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of freedom, like I finally had the upper hand in this whole twisted mess. I kept my cool, played it like nothing was wrong. A few nights later, I even went out for drinks with Marcus, acting like we were still best buddies. He had no idea I'd been with his wife's sister. He sat there, going on about his connection with Lila, saying they'd reached some deeper understanding. I just nodded, keeping a straight face while silently planning my next move. Then Chloe walked into my life. I met her at one of those awkward parties with our mutual friends, a forced social gathering I didn't want to attend. She was Marcus's wife and frankly way out of his league. I noticed her watching me, her gaze lingering a bit too long, like she was curious. I was drunk, pissed off and desperate for some kind of distraction. So when she started talking to me, I leaned into it. Before long, we'd slipped away from the party and found ourselves in one of the spare bedrooms. There was no hesitation this time. We kissed hard, tearing at each other's clothes, both needing an escape from our lousy marriages. The details of that night are a blur, but I remember the feeling. Her nails digging into my back, her breath in my ear. It was chaotic, but it was what we both needed. Of course, I messed up. I left my phone at her place by accident. The next day, Marcus found it, apparently seeing a message from Brooke pop up as he tried to figure out whose phone it was. That's when everything really started unraveling. Marcus didn't confront me directly, but he began acting weird, keeping his distance. Lila, on the other hand, was still lost in her fantasy with Marcus, oblivious to the chaos about to hit. Meanwhile, our friends were starting to notice. Emma, our nosy therapist friend, kept hovering around, pestering me with questions. "Everything all right, Scott? You seem different." Yeah, I was different. I was neck-deep in a war against my cheating wife and her so-called lover, trying to get my revenge without getting caught myself. But it was all beginning to shake. The house of cards was teetering. Lila finally got suspicious when a message from Brooke mistakenly forwarded to her instead of me. She blew up, storming into the living room while I was just trying to watch TV. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, shoving her phone in my face. I shrugged. "I don't know. Why don't you ask your sister?" She was stunned for a second, but then she switched gears, accusing me of being the cheater, the one who'd ruined our marriage. I couldn't help but laugh in her face. "Give it a rest, Lila. Don't act like you're some kind of saint." She was speechless, and for the first time, I saw actual fear in her eyes. I leaned in close and whispered, "I know all about you and Marcus. You thought you could fool me, but I was playing my own game all along." After that, things got ugly fast. Lila and I hardly spoke except to throw accusations, and Marcus stopped coming around, clearly too gutless to face me. Brooke carried on like nothing had happened, which was fine by me. I'd gotten what I wanted. Chloe, though, was a little different. She kept reaching out, hinting that she wanted something more. But I wasn't interested in adding more mess. I'd gotten my revenge, and now all I wanted was a way out of this miserable situation. The final straw came in the most cliché way possible. I came home early from work one day, and there they were, Lila and Marcus, tangled up together on our couch. They didn't even notice me at first. I just stood there, watching, feeling the last remnants of love I had for Lila evaporate. When they finally noticed me, there was a frozen moment of shock. Lila started to mumble some excuse, but I cut her off. "You two deserve each other," I said, calm as can be, before turning around and walking out. That was it. I packed my bags, filed for divorce, and cut them both out of my life. No more games, no more trying to get even. I was done. Looking back, I hardly recognize who I became during those months. But betrayal changes you, twists you into someone you barely know. In the end, though, I'm glad it's over. I lost a wife, a friend, and maybe even a part of myself, but at least now I'm free. Lila's face went pale, then red, then pale again when I said, "I know all about you and Marcus." She tried to deny it, but there was no point. We were both caught in this tangled mess, too deep to untangle without everything falling apart. And the thing was, I still wasn't done. Lila thought she could just walk away without facing any consequences. She was wrong. I still had one last card to play, and I'd make sure she never saw it coming. You know that feeling when you've stopped caring, like it doesn't matter what happens because everything's already wrecked? That's where I was when Lila found the text from Brooke on my phone. I gotten sloppy, sure, but I didn't give a damn. I came home late one night, exhausted from everything: work, Lila's drama, and my own affairs. I guess I'd forgotten to delete a message Brooke had sent after our last get-together. Something casual like, "Last night was wild. Let's do it again sometime." Lila was waiting for me in the living room, her face red, hands shaking as she shoved my phone at me. "What the hell is this, Scott? You've been with my sister." I didn't flinch. I was done pretending. "Yeah? Well, Maybe I got tired of waiting for you to come back after your late nights with Marcus. And that was when the screaming started. She threw every insult in the book at me, but this time I wasn't backing down. I hurled every dirty truth back at her, watching her face twist with rage and shock. You want to talk about betrayal, Lila? How about you and my best friend, sneaking around behind my back for months? Don't act innocent. Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then she fired back, denying everything, blaming me for driving her away. That was it. I snapped, yelling so loud the neighbors probably heard. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Did I go after her? Hell no. Let her run to Marcus. I was done trying to save this mess. A couple of days later, we both showed up at Jason's party, the type of friend who thinks a little gathering will fix everything. Lila put on her fake smile like everything was fine, and I kept my distance, nursing a drink in the corner. But our friends weren't blind. Abby, Lila's coworker, kept asking if she was okay. I could see the cracks showing. She was barely holding it together. I just watched, trying not to punch something every time I saw Marcus's smug face across the room. That's when Jordan, Marcus's younger cousin, came up to me. We'd gotten close lately since he was the only one who seemed to understand the mess I was in. "You good, man?" he asked, handing me another beer. I shrugged at Jordan's question. What's the point anymore? She's been sneaking around with Marcus behind my back. I'm just biding my time, waiting for the right moment to bring it all down. Jordan looked at me, his expression conflicted, like he wanted to say something but held back. Finally, he sighed. "Scott, I didn't want to believe it either, but I've seen the way Marcus looks at her. Maybe it's time to confront him, get it all out in the open." As much as I knew he was right, part of me still craved the satisfaction of catching them red-handed, of having the proof in hand to throw in their faces. Little did I know, Lila and Marcus were still at it, getting off on the thrill of secrecy. Dylan, Marcus's loudmouth friend, let slip that they were sneaking around like a couple of teenagers, checking into hotels late at night. Lila was apparently telling Marcus all the same things she used to say to me, that he made her feel alive again. It was almost comical, but mostly, it just made me sick. So I decided to set my own trap. I asked Jordan to confront Marcus indirectly, to rattle him. He ran into Marcus at the gym, casually bringing up Lila to see if he'd crack. Marcus went pale, stammering out some lame excuse. That's when Jordan laid it on him. "Scott's not stupid, man. He knows. You'd better come clean before it's too late." But Marcus, cocky as ever, shrugged it off, thinking he could keep playing me. I wasn't having it. I waited until I knew Marcus was heading to meet Lila one night and confronted him in the parking lot. The look on his face was priceless. He tried denying it, stuttering through some excuse, but I didn't give him an inch. "Scott, it's not what you think," he stammered, backing away as I closed in. "I never meant for this to happen." I spat at him, rage burning through every word. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You were screwing my wife, my best friend, and now you're trying to act like it's some accidental mistake?" He tried apologizing, mumbling some nonsense about Lila being unhappy and how he was just there for her. That was it. All the anger I'd bottled up came flooding out. I swung, my fist connecting with his jaw, and before I knew it, we were rolling on the ground, fists flying. By the time some bystanders pulled us apart, I had blood dripping from my knuckles, and Marcus's face was a mess. As they dragged me away, only one thought ran through my mind. This isn't over. If they thought they could destroy my life without a scratch, they were dead wrong. But the worst part? Even after the fight, I knew this was just the beginning. The truth was out, but the fallout? That was going to get ugly. When I got home that night, still buzzing with adrenaline, I half expected Lila to be gone. But no, she was there, perched on the couch with a look somewhere between rage and desperation. As soon as I walked in, she launched into me, yelling about how I'd humiliated her, claiming I was turning into the monster she'd always feared. I slammed the door behind me, furious. "Are you kidding me, Lila? I'm the monster? You've been screwing my best friend for months, and now you want to play the victim?" She threw her hands up, tears streaming down her face, but I was too fed up to care. I only did it because you pushed me away, Scott. You were always at work. You never made time for me. I was lonely. Is that so hard to understand? I let out a bitter laugh. So, that's your excuse? You were lonely, so you just hopped into bed with Marcus? The one guy I thought I could trust. She tried to keep justifying herself, spinning her reasons, but I'd heard enough. Every word was like another stab in the back. Finally, I walked away, leaving her there crying as if her tears could somehow erase the mess she'd made. But I was done listening. Meanwhile, Lila went running to her old friend Hannah for sympathy, playing the poor victim as usual. Later, I heard from Hannah that she'd met Lila at some cafe, where Lila tried pouring out her sob story. Hannah, bless her, wasn't buying it. Lila, I get that you were unhappy, Hannah supposedly told her. But cheating with Scott's best friend? Do you have any idea what you've done? Lila stuck to her pity act, claiming she'd felt unfulfilled and needed something more than I could give her. But Hannah laid it out, telling her flat out she was selfish, that she should have divorced me if she was so unhappy. But Lila didn't want just one thing. She wanted the stability of our marriage and the thrill of her affair, as if nothing would fall apart. As for me, my life was unraveling. I couldn't focus on anything. Work was slipping, deadlines were mounting, and I was drowning in this fog of anger and betrayal. Finally, Scott, my boss, called me into his office. Scott, I don't know what's going on, but you've got to get it together, he said, looking at me like a stray dog. Fix whatever's happening at home, or it's going to cost you your job. It was the last thing I needed to hear. I was already barely holding on, and now I had the threat of losing my job on top of everything else. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus. Every time I sat down to work, all I could think about was Lila and Marcus, their little secret life happening right under my nose. Meanwhile, Marcus was apparently cracking too. After our fight, he started avoiding everyone, even Lila. Guilt must have been eating him alive because he finally met up with her to end things, saying it couldn't go on. But Lila wasn't having it. I need you, Marcus, she probably whined, pulling her usual manipulative act. But for once, it didn't work. He left, leaving her alone and desperate. Of course, Lila couldn't let it go. She begged for one last night, and like a fool, he agreed. They met at some rundown hotel, thinking no one would find out. I don't know the full details, but Marcus came out of it looking more broken than ever. He finally told her they had to stop, that they couldn't keep destroying people's lives just to satisfy their own emptiness. One night, after another grueling day at work, I came home wanting nothing more than to collapse. But there she was, Lila, standing in the living room with a half-packed suitcase. What the hell are you doing? I asked, my voice hollow, drained of the anger that used to fill it. She looked at me, her eyes red, filled with a pain that almost seemed real. I can't do this anymore, Scott. I've been lying to myself. I'm not happy, and neither are you. This marriage is over. I met her gaze, barely able to contain the bitterness. Oh, it's over all right. You killed it the moment you spread your legs for Marcus. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but I was past caring. For the first time, she owned up to everything. The affair, the secrets, the lies. I could see in her eyes that she wanted something, maybe forgiveness, maybe closure. But all I felt was emptiness. Get out, I said, my voice cold and final. Just pack up your shit and go. And that was it. No more excuses, no more lies. The marriage we'd built, the life I thought I had, was finally irreversibly shattered. The day after that final showdown, I went straight to the lawyer and filed for divorce. I didn't even wait for Lila to leave the house. I just signed the papers and started the process of cutting her out of my life entirely. She tried reaching out, wanted to talk things through, or find some way to salvage whatever was left between us. But I was done. There was nothing worth saving. Our friends, of course, started choosing sides, and Emma, our know-it-all therapist friend, kept pushing for reconciliation. Maybe counseling could help, she'd suggest, acting like she understood the mess we'd been through. But it was far too late. The damage was beyond repair, and I wasn't about to let Lila drag me back into her chaos. The divorce itself was a nightmare, filled with accusations and bitterness from both sides. But in the end, it was done. Lila, the woman I'd once loved, became nothing more than a painful memory, a piece of my past that I was ready to leave behind. When it was finally over, when the papers were signed and Lila was out of my life, I felt something I hadn't expected. Freedom. Sure, there were days when it felt like my world had been ripped apart. But maybe that's exactly what I needed. After everything that had happened, it was like I was standing in the ruins of a life I barely recognized. But at least those ruins were mine to rebuild. Lila moved out, and I heard from mutual friends that she'd found a small apartment downtown to start fresh. I didn't really care what she was up to, but a part of me did wonder if she felt any of the same loss, or if she just moved on without a backward glance. Turns out she wasn't doing too badly. According to the gossip, she'd met some guy named Noah at an art exhibit. He was the opposite of me. Some charming, artsy type who probably talked about feelings and self-discovery over wine. I thought, good for her. Let her have her artsy fling. Maybe that was what she needed all along. For me, though, jumping into something new wasn't on the agenda. I was still furious, still trying to figure out who I even was without Lila around. I buried myself in work, diving into new projects, spending late nights at the office. Anything to distract myself from the mess of my personal life. And that's when Grace entered the picture. She was a new hire. Young, smart, full of energy, and surprisingly enthusiastic about her job, which was rare in our line of work. At first, we kept it casual, just coffee and small talk about projects. But Grace was different. She had this way of really listening, like she genuinely cared. One night, after a particularly rough day, she found me sitting alone in the break room. "Hey, Scott," she said with that bright, unwavering smile. "You look like you could use a drink. How about we grab one after work?" I hesitated but figured, why not? I had nothing left to lose. So, we ended up at a dive bar a few blocks from the office, and for the first time in months, I actually found myself enjoying someone's company. Grace was easy to talk to, no drama, no hidden motives. She quickly became my go-to whenever I needed a break or someone to vent to, someone who just listened. Meanwhile, Lila was off on her own journey of self-discovery. Social media was her personal scrapbook, filled with photos of her and Noah at art classes or city festivals, with captions about new beginnings and finding herself. Part of me wanted to call her out, but another part just didn't care anymore. She could have her fun, as long as it was far away from me. Then, out of nowhere, she ran into Marcus. They bumped into each other at a cafe downtown. I wasn't there, obviously, but mutual friends made sure I heard all about it. Apparently, it was an awkward, painful encounter. Lila confronted him, finally getting the closure she'd been avoiding. They talked about all the destruction they'd caused, how it hurt me, themselves, and their so-called friendship. Marcus half-heartedly apologized, but the damage was done. They left that cafe like two people hit by a truck, probably realizing they'd lost a lot more than they'd bargained for. In the meantime, things with Grace grew closer. I wouldn't call it a relationship, at least not yet, but it was something. She was there for me in ways Lila never was. We started hanging out outside of work, cooking together, watching movies, just enjoying each other's company. One night, after hours of talking, she looked at me with those clear, understanding eyes and said, "You've been through hell, Scott, but you're not defined by your mistakes. You deserve to be happy, you know?" I don't know why, but that hit me. For so long, I'd been telling myself that I'd driven Lila away, that I deserved all the fallout. But with Grace, it felt different. She made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could actually have a future beyond the train wreck my life had become. Lila seemed content with Noah. They were inseparable, and as time went on, I heard less and less about her. Good, I thought. If she found happiness with him, more power to her. As for me, I was done trying to fix everyone else's problems. It was time to focus on me. Eventually, Lila and I sat down one last time to clear the air. There was no shouting, no accusations. Just two people who had once loved each other, trying to understand where it all went wrong. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her eyes wet with tears. I never meant to hurt you. I'm sorry too, I replied, though I wasn't sure if I meant it or if I was just exhausted from holding on to so much anger. We shook hands, exchanged an awkward goodbye, and just like that, the last chapter of our messy story was finally closed. Now it's just me and Grace. We're taking things slow, no pressure, no labels. For the first time in a long while, I feel hopeful. I'm setting new goals at work, taking on projects I actually care about, and even signed up for a gym membership. Lila's out there with Noah, building her new life, and I hope she finds whatever it was she was looking for. As for me, I'm done looking back. Sometimes the only way to start over is to burn everything down and rebuild from the ashes. And this time, I'm building a life that's just for me.